Hello, Springfield Faith Center, and thank you for joining us for episode 2 of Without Walls, SFC Without Walls.
Episode 2.
We are on officially episode 2. We have arrived as podcast overlords, and
we are making our way into this thing.
yeah, we're making it happen.
That's going on my business card now.
Today, we've got a number of exciting things that we're gonna cover. We're gonna do Beyond Sunday. We're gonna talk a little bit about more in our Joy series, and I'm excited to dive in. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Pastor Daniel, I believe you are leading us in our Beyond Sunday segment.
So this last weekend we got
Wait.
Oh,
Before we start, let's introduce ourselves.
Oh, that's right.
I mean, because we
Look
just
at me
said
just
Pastor
assuming
Daniel.
that we're so well known that everybody...
Well, I'll start. I'm Brandon. I'm the senior pastor here at Springfield Faith Center. And
I am Tony. I'm the youth pastor here at Springfield Faith Center.
And now let us introduce to you the sage among us right here.
And I'm Daniel. I'm the associate pastor here.
All right, let's get into Beyond Sunday.
Cool.
Dan.
So this last weekend, Tony brought the word for us, and he was preaching out of Philippians chapter 2. And so I want to start with Brandon, you and I, kind of following up on Tony's message. And one of the consistent questions that we want to ask every week is, what stood out to you? What stuck with you? What mattered to you? What really resonated with you? So, Brandon, are you comfortable starting with that one?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. And as you're listening into the podcast and you're doing it in one of our platforms that allows you to make comments, go ahead and we want you to answer the question as well. What stood out to you from this week's passage? And I think for me, Tony, it was kind of in the introduction. It wasn't really in the meat of your sermon, but I think the comment in the beginning was the great introduction into, or a transition point into it. And you said, I'm paraphrasing you, but we cannot bear the weight of ministry on our own. And I think for me, that was kind of the big thing as I looked around and started thinking and reflecting on my life. And yeah, you're about to preach on Timothy and Epaphroditus, right? Some of those, kind of a weird passage of scripture because it's specific people, but it made me start to think about the people that I've been in ministry with over the years, and how I can't even get to where I'm at today, could not have gotten to where I am at, or couldn't have arrived where I'm at without ministering with people. And I think so many times in Christianity and in ministry, we get to this point where we have isolated ourselves to the point where we feel like we're doing it alone. And Paul is pretty clear, like the guy who has a pedigree kind of above everyone else says, I do this with Timothy, who is like a son in the faith, and I do this with Epaphroditus, who is a fellow soldier in the gospel. And so that stood out to me as ministry is always done in partnership, or we can't bear the weight of ministry alone. That's what stood out to me. What about you, Daniel?
And I love that part of Paul's story, too, because it's echoed throughout the book of Acts that he doesn't go alone, hardly ever. In fact, I think the only major story where Paul is by himself is the Mars Hill address in Athens, when he goes there, because he leaves. I don't remember what the exact circumstances are, but he's forced to go on by himself. And that's a great story. But as far as measurable, fruitful ministry in terms of converts and the beginning of a church, that's like one of the biggest failures on his part in Acts. Nothing comes of that as far as what we would normally identify as, spiritual fruit in that scene. And I don't know that I would totally chalk it up to him being by himself, but it seems to me, a relevant corollary in the story that so much of what we see in the book of Acts really is dependent on his relationships that go with him.
Yeah. And really, we've been coming up on this idea several times now, and so it's interesting, right? He gets to the end of chapter 2, and he's kind of teasing that out a little bit more of, partnership, because the Philippians were partners, and now it's Timothy and Epaphroditus are partners, and so that stood out to me. What challenged you think, Daniel, from the message?
So I loved what you shared about emotions, Tony, and how you contrasted that idolatry of self with the role of God. And I don't remember, remind me of the phrase you said, we tend to the big three that we rely
Oh,
on.
the trinity of our wants, needs, and feelings.
That's what it was. The trinity of our wants, needs, and feelings, and how the idolatry of those things leads directly to selfishness of the worst kind. And you clarified, and I appreciated this, it's not that those things are inherently bad, those wants, needs, and desires, whatever those are. The problem is that we get them out of context. That if I place those things first, if those become the guiding framework that I use for all decision making in my life, then I'm going to get myself in huge trouble really, really quickly. I have to get those in the correct order where God has to come first, and then those things can be experienced in partnership with Him. And that was challenging for me on a couple of levels. But just the reminder that those things have an appropriate place. They are supposed to be experienced. They are supposed to be interacted with. It's just that they need to be contextually healthy and appropriate when I do. And that goes both directions, and this is where it's personally applicable to me, because they're obviously culturally we have a tendency to overemphasize those things and make those things the God of our lives. My story was the opposite, where I sort of shut them down growing up, where my feelings, my emotions had no role. And it was just, and you referenced this later because you talked about a sort of false Christian experience where joy is the only emotion you're ever supposed to feel. This idea that sometimes we can make that mistake in our Christianity, that because we see joy so much and so regularly, especially in the book of Philippians, that we can make this mistake that it's the only biblically appropriate emotion, when the truth is, all those emotions were given to us. There are healthy ways to experience them in connection with God. They're meant to be there. We see Jesus himself experience sorrow, grief, anger on occasion. We see him, there's a range. We see God the Father himself, especially in the Old Testament, experiencing a range of emotions, grief, jealousy, a number of things. And that was challenging to me because it was a reminder that I need to continue engaging those parts of my life. I can't just shut them down and push them off to the side. And obviously that's relevant to my story over the course of this last year because of my interaction with grief and the loss of my dad and all of that. So that was what was challenging to me, was that reminder about maintaining the appropriate and healthy place for how I interact with my own emotions, keeping them subject to God's guidance in my life, but also making sure that they're part of the conversation and part of the process.
Yeah. I mean, nobody who reads the Bible consistently and carefully, Genesis through Revelation, is ever going to walk away from that thinking that the only thing God expects you to experience is joy. It's just not possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and in this passage, it's what you were touching on, Daniel. It's sorrow and joy together.
Yep.
Like Paul says, I would have had sorrow upon sorrow if God didn't have mercy on Epaphroditus. And so it's like Paul's willing to lay that out, willing to say, like, sorrow is a real part of the faith and real part of our emotional, journey. But it's also like can be included in an overall rejoicing attitude, an approach to God that can hold the two in tension.
Yeah. And I don't remember, Brandon, if you said this on Sunday or at staff meeting, but you made a comment that joy in our relationship with God creates this foundation for us, and then we experience the range of emotions based on that. And I thought that there was a lot of health in that because it was this reminder that it's not an either or, it's a both and situation. That the joy God offers, his goal in it, is for it to be consistently available in addition to whatever else we're experiencing. And what you just said about Paul was sorrowful that Epaphroditus was sick. There was grief there, but there was also the joy of the Lord at the same time. Those two things weren't mutually exclusive to each other.
Yeah.
I don't know when I did say that, but if I did, that sounded good.
I think I said that in first service.
maybe
I said that it's
Tony said it. Maybe I'm
the hum
misattributing.
beneath all of it when you're. But he's the doctor, so
No,
you do give him the
proper quote, and citation goes to Pastor.
My footnote fails the MLA standard or whatever we're using, APA. So, all right. So the third question that we want to ask.
Did you share what was most challenging to you?
Oh, I don't think you did.
I think that the idea of sorrow and joy and walking through that was a challenge to me, looking at that. But I also looking back through the notes of of your sermon, you did kind of make again. Sometimes it's the off comments. I do listen to your big points, but the off comments sometimes the Spirit works in me. But you were talking about we need to offer a hopeful alternative.
Oh yeah.
To the we're at war with forces that are contrary or in opposition to the gospel, and we mentioned that. I mentioned that when we preached through Acts 16, and when Paul goes into Philippi, these spiritual forces start to arise and start to combat the gospel. But it's one thing just to recognize it and point them out. It's another thing to offer an alternative. And when we are in unity, that's when the goodness of God can be on full display. That was kind of one of the way your big point, your main big idea worked into the application point. So for me, it was like, okay, well, it's good to point out, because I'm really good at pointing out what is deficient or defective in culture. But then, like, the other side of the coin is, well, now what's the alternative?
Yeah.
And I think that is going to be the church's big task here, as we go forward through all the crazy things, uncertain future, adverse times we're going through, is to have that alternative that's based on the gospel. It's biblically centered. So that's what's challenging to me, is like, okay, let's offer something and let's live it out, because that's going to be giving the goodness of God, and we're displaying it.
Yeah, and presenting it in a way that is has the fragrance of Christ in it. So it's got tact and it's got kindness, but it's firm and it's true, is going to prevent us from just adding to the cultural noise that we're seeing all the time. And it is just noise. Like, nobody's listening to each other. People are yelling at each other. That's why I was careful to say a hopeful alternative, because if it doesn't have hopeful as like the primary thing, then it's not really going to be an alternative worth listening to.
Right. Yeah. At the end of the day, we still want it to be good news.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Exactly.
has to be good. Yeah.
Cool. I love it. All right. So each week in Beyond Sunday, we want to ask those three questions: what stood out, what challenged you, and then finally, Tony, the last question is, what would you add? Was there anything that you just didn't have time for, or if you got a chance to expand on the themes of your message, what would you include? What would you add?
Yeah. There was an illustration for this point of like what's at stake if we don't get rid of this lone ranger mindset to ministry, and that is a lot of the Western church is kind of built on the cult of personality.
Yeah.
So you'll get these big mega churches with celebrity pastors who have best-selling books and sermons that go viral on YouTube. And there'll be churches of like 10,000 people. And then that one pastor, this one guy in the church of 10,000 people, will have a big moral failing, and the church will totally collapse and crumble, and you won't know. Or like they don't even have a moral failing. They just move on to the next assignment, and that church crumbles.
Right.
And for me, like, I think there's something in the way that we have inherited like Christian leadership that kind of forces pastors and leaders into this place where it's like, if you're not really like a big time cultural influencer and you're not really like have a celebrity status, then you aren't really actually having an impact on the kingdom, and you aren't actually qualified to lead the church. And I think that creates this sense of isolation. It creates this pressure that you have to do it by yourself, and it just is begging you to have some massive moral failing. And I mean, in the last year alone, two prominent Christian leaders. One, Ravi Zacharias, who wasn't a pastor, but he did have this ministry that was totally centered around him.
Yeah.
And then the lead pastor of Hillsong, New York, who was somebody that I had spent time with and really got a lot out of his ministry. Big moral failings, and still stuff coming out every day about stuff they did. And I'm not trying to say that they are not to be held responsible for what happened, but that they are in some ways victims of kind of a system that says this is how you have to be a prominent Western thought leader, is to do this alone and shoulder it by yourself. And I know for me, when I'm isolated and I'm experiencing temptation and struggles, it's way easier to give in to those temptations and struggles, as opposed to if I have brothers and fathers and mothers in the faith who I can talk to and kind of experience prayer and solidarity with them.
And if you're listening today and you're wondering, how did he get celebrity status, or like, that kind of a thing out of the message? Well, just bringing it back, Paul, when he mentions Timothy and mentions Epaphroditus, he doesn't say, I'm going to send to you Timothy, mega church pastor and best-selling author and theologian of our time. He says, I'm going to send Timothy, who is a son in the faith who actually cares for your interests, like is someone who cares about you. And then Epaphroditus, he gives 3 titles for him, and he says he's a brother, a co-worker, and a fellow soldier. And we know that Paul starts the letter with Paul and Timothy, slaves of Christ.
Right.
So he's not going in there with, again, Amazon bestseller list,
Yeah.
worldwide speaker, and all. He's going in there saying, "Look, we're just brothers. We're soldiers. We're partners. We're slaves of God, and that's who I'm sending to you."
Yeah.
And I was convicted of kind of falling into the celebrity status thing, not for myself, but like I realized I was getting more from pastors who were thousands of miles away, who had an online ministry, especially now during COVID. You guys can listen to we can listen to anyone we want and feel like we're part of their ministry. But like, I felt convicted because the one who actually cares for me and ministers to me and loves me, like I was listening and kind of grabbing more from other people, other voices, when the one voice who actually like has given his life to serve me as someone who was in his congregation, like I was so convicted of that as well. And so, I mean, Timothy and Epaphroditus are like the models of what it is to co-labor with other people, but also they don't take the status that the world's trying to offer.
Absolutely.
They take a Christ-shaped status. So.
Yeah.
And there's this groundedness that Paul comes with that is important to hang on to, because we, especially here in the American church, have this terrible tendency to, I don't know what to call it, to put pastors on a pedestal, to put celebrities in general on a pedestal, to somehow other our leadership and to view them as not quite human anymore. And I know that historically speaking, we do that with Paul. I look back and I think he wasn't a normal person. He was some sort of superhero, some sort of Superman. And I've done the same thing with spiritual leaders in my life, pastors or whoever. And there's a tendency to expect, and not that we can't expect health from our leadership, because I think that we can and that we should, but there's a tendency to forget or conveniently ignore that they're all human. They're all people. And like you said, Tony, we still need to hold folks accountable for the mistakes and the failures, but I think that there's an important thing to remember, because as soon as that process starts, like if I start viewing myself as something different, then I'm going to drift away from some of those grounding relationships, some of that viewpoint, like, having Timothy and Epaphroditus there, having that sense of connectedness to the people around me. If I start viewing my pastor as somebody who's a little bit more than human, who doesn't necessarily need the support structures that a normal person might need, and if I start then gradually removing those support structures, or if I don't make sure that they're in place for my pastor or my leadership, I'm not doing that person any favors by removing those things. So it's kind of funny. Full disclosure, this is actually the second time we've tried recording this, right? And we had audio problems yesterday. And this conversation led into a conversation about the woman who founded the denomination that we're a part of, Foursquare. It was founded by a woman named Amy Semple McPherson. And her story involves a lot of those elements where, as she became more successful to a certain degree, there was less and less accountability, less and less support for her. And in her story, there are some questionable moments where she is not perfect. And we started talking about that yesterday. And I realized that the conversation was going on a little bit long, and Brandon got to a point where he was sharing some of those moments, and I kind of jumped in and ushered the conversation on to the next thing, and it made it sound like I was trying to somehow defend her or like deflect the conversation. Like, no, we can't talk about that.
Saint Amy, no.
Saint Amy, don't you dare drag her through the mud. When the truth is, we need to be very aware of that kind of history and the cost of I don't know what to call it, putting people on a pedestal, not recognizing the humanity and the limited nature of even the people that we are impressed by.
And I think it also goes to kind of even the scope of what we're doing here in this podcast, excuse me, of the local church and locality. Like, rather than this global stage, like, we need to be accountable as ministers, leaders here, accountable to our church, accountable to each other, and it's accountable to a local church. And Paul does that by he's kind of introducing them as far as accountability. Like, these are my brothers who are accountable to me. Like, I'm sending them to you knowing that they're not going on their own accord. They're going as accountable people.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good
Yeah.
way to look at it. But when you preach a sermon, you have so much you do or so much you study for, and then so little time. So I love that part of the segment where we get a chance to ask.
Me too.
Ask people
Yeah.
to expand.
Yeah.
I like that.
Cool. All right. So the next thing that we wanted to talk about was joy and a particular life application
Yeah.
of joy. And this time, Brandon, you were going to share about joy in finances.
Right? Why are you going to make it rain today?
Hold on, throw that at me again. Throw that at me again.
Okay, so let's try. So, Brandon, you were going to talk about joy in finances.
Dollar bills.
As he punches the microphone, yeah.
Yeah, so again, the idea of our sermon series going through Philippians is the idea of one, joy. That was kind of the overarching theme. One, meaning unity. Paul, throughout the whole letter, is always talking about being united in different ways, in different contexts, different portions, even to the very end when he pleads with two women to be united.
Yep.
And so that's the oneness of it. So one, and then joy. The joy is all over the text. 14 different times. It's joy, rejoicing, make my joy complete, those kind of words. And so last week we did joy in relationships. This week we're going to do joy in finances. And this really comes from probably the coffee mug Bible verse you have, chapter 4, verse 13.
I do actually have a coffee mug with a Bible verse.
Does it say, is it?
I got it for Kelsey like 4 years ago.
Oh, really? Now, you might have heard this of like, hey, right before I'm going to go shoot a free throw or score a touchdown or play, go for a job interview, I go, propose?
Yeah.
You did that before you proposed?
I was like, I can do all things through Christ, including manipulate this woman into marrying me.
Whoa.
Well, you guys just celebrated your anniversary, so you're good.
Yeah.
But
6
anyway,
years, we're solid.
Clearly it worked out, yeah.
Philippians 4, again, it's the I can do all things through Christ and strengthens me, but the context of that verse really goes with the idea of finances and what you have. And so in chapter 4, verse 10, Paul says, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly because once again you renewed your care for me. You were in fact concerned about me, but lacked the opportunity to show it. I don't say this out of need, but I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. I know both how to make do with little and how to make do with a lot. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being content. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or in need, I am able to do all things through him who strengthens me. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that for Paul, joy in finances and having little and having a lot, he's talking about financial just means. And it's joy in finances is all about contentment. And, so I was thinking, what is contentment biblically? What does the word here mean? Because we can have definitions, but Paul applies them certain ways. And here it's the idea of being self-sufficient.
Yeah.
So contentment, having joy in our financial situation is all about realizing, you know what, I'm okay. I'm content with what I have in the sufficiency that I have for this moment. And this is pretty radical because Paul is speaking and writing, not speaking, he's writing from prison.
Yep.
And he is dependent on Christ's followers, the Philippian church, and he said they actually sent him something, met his need, but he's dependent on them to survive in prison. Prison in the first century isn't like today where you actually have electricity, you get food, you have somewhere to sleep, you can even get a degree if you want, or get your diploma. It's not like that. It was basically whatever support you're given, that's how you survive. Yeah. And so that's what Paul's getting at of I've had very little while in prison, I've had a lot. And so I know that the secret of that is being content. And the secret of being content is what? It's Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Knowing that the strength of Christ will get him through in times of need and in times of plenty. And so, the writer of Hebrews talks a little bit about this as well. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, it says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Interesting there, right? Flee from love of money, stay away from that, and be content with what you have.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, if we look about this biblically, there's really two warnings when it comes to finances. And the first one is this: don't love money. And the reason why is it won't satisfy you. in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. I know we don't read Ecclesiastes very much,
Because
but
it's weird.
Meaningless.
it's meaningless. It's vanity, right?
And it's one of those, seriously, it's one of those books where unless you're reading it from beginning to end,
Yeah.
like you're going to get some weird ideas out of it.
And again, we could do a whole series on Ecclesiastes, but just not
Maybe
today.
we will.
There, the writer says, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with it, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity." And so the idea is loving money is meaningless because it doesn't ever produce anything for it. It doesn't satisfy you. At the end of the day, you're going to want more, and you're not going to be content with what you do have. And don't love money. Another warning is it will lead you astray. So he says this: for the love of money is in 1 Timothy chapter 6. Paul writes to Timothy there, says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." So don't love money. What do you guys think about that warning?
That makes me think of one of my favorite Timothy Queller. Wow, my brain's still waking up. Timothy Keller quotes is he says that an idol is any neutral thing turned into an ultimate thing, and it's very similar to what it sounds like Paul's getting at here. Is when you love money, you make it the ultimate thing. You make it your hope. You and I said this, it feels disingenuous to say it now because I said this when we recorded yesterday, but I feel like it bears repeating, is that verse in Philippians where it says, "I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength." I mean, most of us, if we're honest, we really believe we can all do all things through money. That gives us strength, that gives us affluence, gives us things that we want and need, and makes other people want to be drawn to us. And so I think that this is a very different, the Bible is painting a very different narrative and ethic around money than what a lot of us inherit just by growing up in the culture that we do. And something that kind of goes alongside with this is that for my wife and I, we didn't really experience finances and joy complete like opposites of each other for us. Like it was, finances were just the great bane and agony of our existence. And
With you.
and for us, like when we came to the realization that everything we have is on loan from the Lord, like all of our money, all of our possessions, even each other, like it all belongs to God, that He's gifted to us and lent to us until we're united with each other in heaven. Like then all of a sudden it's like, this isn't my money. These are resources I've been asked to steward. And so how do I best steward my resources in a way where if I'm constantly spending money I shouldn't be spending, and I'm needing to borrow from Peter to pay Paul, like then I am a slave to my money. Or if I'm constantly hoarding and have the inability to be generous to someone who's in need, and I have the ability to meet their needs, like that I'm still like a slave to money. And God asks us to be a slave to Christ and Christ alone. And part of being a slave to Christ is saying all that we have belongs to you, and we're going to steward this in a way that reflects who you are.
Yeah, and that's such an important perspective because it goes along with, Brandon, what you were saying a minute ago, that verse in Philippians 4, that really my sense of self-sufficiency, my sense of security comes from my relationship to Christ and what He's doing for me. And if I get that understanding of finances out of order, I will buy into the cultural understanding that money is there to make me feel secure.
Yeah.
Money is there as my way to feel like I am in control of my universe. And this is how I keep myself safe and cared for with my finances. And there's a fine line between responsibility and stewardship and making money the God of my life. And it's really easy to blur that line and to mix those two things in with each other. But what we know, biblically speaking, is that I am supposed to be responsible. I am supposed to steward what I have on loan from God, but I am not supposed to view it as my vehicle for taking care of all of my own needs and for covering for myself. It reminds me, earlier this week, a member of our leadership team here at church, Bev Lenhart, was talking about this idea of need in the life of a Christian. And she was pointing out that for somebody who does not see their own needs, sometimes it's hard for Jesus to do anything for them. And that is such a trap for people who are financially very well off, because sometimes people in that position who have a lot of wealth, it's tough for them to see their own needs. It's easy for them to feel like, I've got everything under control. I've got it all taken care of. I have everything I need. I don't need God to step in and help with my self-sufficiency.
Yep.
I don't need him to provide, as Paul says in Philippians 4. I don't need him to provide because I've got it all taken care of.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that's not the place that we want to land. We want to see our finances as something on loan, as a gift, something that is an aspect of the kingdom and my kingdom life and my Christianity, rather than as a tool for securing myself and giving me a false sense of control over reality.
Yeah.
So that first warning, don't love money. It won't satisfy you. It'll lead you astray. I think we see another warning is don't put your hope in money. Don't put your confidence in money. Later on in 1 Timothy, Paul says this: command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth.
Exactly.
Which is so uncertain. I think that's the big thing. It's uncertain. Like wealth and money, we all know that like any kind of change in anything, and either finances go down or they go up. I mean, they're so uncertain. But put your hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Oh, right there. God provides us for our enjoyment. Like he's the one who does. So command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. And I think, Tony, that quote you were saying from Timothy Keller of don't take the, basically, well, I'm going to apply it differently, but keep the neutral thing,
Yeah.
rather than elevating it to the most important thing.
Yeah.
Keep the neutral thing. In this case, money is neutral, but let's use it for good. And that's, I think, what Paul's getting at here. He's saying to the wealthy, like, teach them not to be arrogant with what they have, but teach them to be generous. Like, don't tell them not to love money, don't put confidence, but use that money to do good. Like, don't hate money. Like, you know, it's like if you have rich people in your ministry, in your group, like, don't tell them to hate the money. Just like encourage them to rather than like put hope in money, like put hope in God, and then take that money and be generous with it. Be kingdom minded with it. Like, be an example of the kingdom with the money. Because again, nowhere in the scripture does it say like God says to hate money or to like hate wealth. He's saying like, don't let it become the most important thing. Like, you know, keep it neutral and use it for good. And use it for the kingdom.
And there is like this understanding in the Bible that I think it's like sex and money are two things that I feel like the Bible hits hard so much as like the greatest potential threats that can battle for whether or not Jesus is actually going to be Lord over your life. And because we talked about this earlier, but that story of the rich man who wants to be one of Jesus's disciples, and Jesus says like, sell all you have and give it to the poor, and then you can come follow me. And what does he do? He walks away sad because he had great wealth, and he knew, I don't love Jesus more than I love my money, so I can't give it away. And then Jesus, what does he say later? How it's easier for a camel to enter the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And that's not because if you're rich, you're inherently sinful, but that's because like the more you have, the less need you feel to depend on the Lord, which is what you touched on earlier, Dan. And that's ultimately God's like end goal for us, is to be totally dependent and intimate with him.
Yep, exactly.
So those two warnings, we'll repeat them again. Don't love money and don't put hope in money. If you're watching or following with us in the comment sections, maybe share what you've gotten out of those two warnings. Like how does the love of money sometimes creep into your life? And then maybe how does sometimes we put our hope or confidence in the income we have and the money we're going to earn, those kinds of things. Share with us in dialogue down below. So I said that the Bible kind of issues two overarching warnings and then gives one command. And in Proverbs 3:9, it says, honor God with your money. So honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of your crops. So again, it is not like, what is it not saying? It's not saying like, don't be wealthy. It's saying, no, in your wealth, with your wealth, honor God. And so let's get really practical. How can we honor God with our money? What are some of the ways in which us three have actually honored God with our money?
I'll say, because this is newer for my wife and I had a huge like come to Jesus moment a few months ago where I was in my devotions and I was at the end of Matthew 25 where Jesus says like, unless you are caring for the poor, the sick, the prisoner, the foreigner, like you are not caring for me. And at the end times, like Jesus says that is going to be the metric I use against you about whether or not you will be with me in heaven or in fire, in that fire of hell forever. And I don't know, I don't know that the point of that passage is to like make a salvation theology around it. I think there's a bigger point happening there, but it wrecked me because I knew that for all of my like intentions to be like generous and I've talked in the past a lot about justice and all that stuff. I have never done anything like I've given of my finances to take care of people ever. I've lent money to friends or like close friends who like were in a bind, but Kelsey and I just had a like come to Jesus talk where we were like, we cannot, to the point where I'm like, I don't know that I can genuinely call myself a Christian unless I'm giving to people who need. And so we set out just a portion of our budget where every month, in addition to our tithe, we're giving to the Eugene Mission or Hosea Youth or different organizations that are equipping like the most vulnerable people in our society with the resources they need to get out of their situation and circumstance. And for us, like that, it's not a matter of like, it's not even like a matter of sacrifice as it is, this is how we're worshiping right now. Like this is a matter of worship to the Lord that like, this is how we honor the Lord with our finances. And then the other thing for us, the two big things has been like budgeting and not being in a bind. And if you're constantly in a bind and reckless with your money, then you are not able to be someone who's able to be generous. You just don't have the ability to worship the Lord with your money if you're constantly hustling for more. And so for us, like those were two things that we had to shore up, like being really careful with our budget so that, not so that we can have more for ourselves, but so that we can give more as needed.
Yeah, I mean, for my wife and I, there have been two occasions that I can think of where we became aware of financial needs of friends of ours, where they were going to come up short on a particular thing on a given month. And we were in a position to offer them finances and to help out. And I cannot tell you, from me at least, what a joy it was to be able to do that and play that role. In those moments, to be able to go to them and say, look, here, have this gift. It's not a loan. You don't have to pay it back. It's just we were in a financial position where losing the money wasn't going to hurt us. It wasn't going to sink us for that month.
Yeah.
And these folks were in a situation where it was that way. And being able to function in that capacity was awesome. And there have been some times in our lives where we needed to be the recipient as well. There were some times like that. Yeah. But being able to play that role of generosity and function like that for someone else was, I don't know that I've ever experienced anything quite like that.
Yeah.
So for me and Sarah in our marriage, I remember a point in time early on in ministry, we'd look at our bank account online and we're like, okay, we're going to be under this month.
Had a lot of months.
And we were like, I was like, well, like, how do we tithe? Like, that was a question I thought while I was pastoring. I'm like, how do I tithe? We don't have.
It's just not there.
It's not there. We're going to go under again. We're going to get, a fee for that. And basically she and I came together and we're like, we got to like get a plan for our finances and we have to come up with a plan. And so I did research. I found Dave Ramsey because every Christian, seems to somehow follow him. And I actually like listened to his podcast and I was like, we need to do this. Like this it's doable when you do it. And that was
baby
kind of
steps.
Baby steps.
Lifesavers.
Yeah.
So we did a budget first and we realized, okay, let's set it all up and let's go. First goes to tithe right away. And yes, I'm a pastor and I earn money from the tithe and then I give back to the tithe because I believe that's what I'm called to do. And so we did tithe first and then rent and then we did gas and food, the kind of the things we need. And then I realized, okay, what do we need and what is kind of an expense that we're just spending that isn't really a need. It's kind of we got money here, we got money here. And I realized once we told our money where to go, we were able to have joy. We were able to have freedom. Like I think Dave Ramsey's thing is financial peace, right? We were able to have peace and joy because we realized, okay, well we've actually budgeted. Now we can look at Christmas and we don't have to like worry about paying off a credit card bill.
Don't feel like there's
Christmas.
an elephant sitting on your chest.
Yeah,
as
like
you approach
I
those
can
things.
get my kids some gifts for Christmas and let them have some joy and in that and it's something we find joy giving and being able to sponsor people. Give in offerings, give to charities, like you said, things that we feel like aligns with our vision of the kingdom and how we want our money to be spent to do good and but it came when we budgeted, when we set up a plan, and we told our money where to go.
Yeah.
And because otherwise we're at the end of the month going, where did our money go?
Yeah.
We asked that
Right.
question, where did it go?
Yeah. And I think like, nope, so thought's gone. Go ahead.
Well, part of that I think for us was finding the contentment.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is what we have. Let's tell our money where to go. Let's budget for a little bit of, spending wherever we want, kind of a thing. Like, it's not a huge line. I think it's like $20 a month or something like that. We get to spend on whatever we want. You save it up for a couple months and you go buy yourself something. But, it was that contentment of this is what we have. We don't need this. This isn't a need. That's a want. That's an extra, right? So streaming services are pretty light in our family. We share. We're on a plan, a phone bill with multiple people in our family, all different states and stuff like that. Hopefully AT&T doesn't hear us, but we were able to kind of share different couple streaming services with families, and we're trying to do all we can to make that money go further. And then we said, well, we want to provide something for our kids down the future, and so we kind of took a little bit of money away from them and away for them, and it's the contentment of going, okay, I don't need to go shopping for this every month. I don't need to go out to eat all the time. I don't need to have all these extra things in our fridge. I could just we're good with this.
Yeah.
And we've had more contentment not worrying about finances, because that was a big struggle. We'd have conflict over that all the time, and so. It was learning to be content was for us, learning to figure out where to put our money, so that way we don't at the end of the month go, where did it all go?
Yeah. That's good, man. Well, let's segue this conversation. We have been going for almost a little over 40 minutes now, and we want to wrap it up with a conversation just to kind of bring it a little light, land the plane in some smooth waters. And we're just going to throw out a goofy question of what is something that each of us finds that most people seem to really love that each of us finds overrated.
I'll go first. I was thinking about this, and I had a really bad answer last time we recorded.
So it was the Lord that we got to do
But
this
I think Starbucks is overrated.
Ooh.
I think I go there and I get stuff because it's so convenient. But every time I'm there, I'm like, this cup of coffee is not any better than anything.
You just spent half your monthly budget on a cup
Oh
of
my
coffee.
gosh.
Yeah, we had to figure that out in the budget. So we really like, and we miss it because we moved from a place that owned it, or that had it, was Sprouts has their own bulk coffee section. They had an organic Guatemalan or Peruvian. We liked both of those blends, but that was way better drip coffee than Starbucks. And I know Starbucks is kind of convenient. That's why I know Oregon though, Dutch Bros is probably more of a thing because people are the
It's
younger,
about tied.
the
I'd say
younger.
it's
Probably
tied.
tied.
But yeah, I think it's totally overrated. So.
Yeah.
I mean,
overpriced.
as someone who drinks Starbucks more than I should, I agree with you, because it's convenient. And like, I think it was a couple days ago, I was just exhausted, or it was yesterday, I was exhausted, and we had a big event last night, and I was like, I don't have time to go home and make coffee, and I don't like the coffee here at the church, so I went and got Starbucks, but I didn't feel good about myself when I did it.
So there you go. If you have coffee recommendations for us,
Yes,
please
put them down in the comments.
Yeah.
I want to see.
Yeah, and if you put anything other than Sister's Coffee Company, you're wrong. Okay.
My thing, and feel free to not email me about this, but I think that the TV show The Mandalorian is overrated. Everybody seems to love it. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't hate it, but I love it either. It was okay.
We just watched it when we moved here because we had started it a couple times, and then I think with the move and just like at night getting tired, so we started it. We watched it here, and I actually liked it.
You like it?
Yeah.
Dan and I don't have a lot of common Star Wars ground, but
No,
we do
there have
agree on this one. I'm a little bit like, The Mandalorian's K. It's just okay.
Yeah, there are not many things in life that I'm willing to get in arguments over. Just not that passionate about a lot of things, but Star Wars is one of them. So
Yeah. I'll get in an argument over anything, but Star Wars is
Yes,
still one of them.
You
Yeah.
will, yeah.
Did you already say yours?
No, mine's the TV show Seinfeld.
that's right.
I just think people are weird about that show, and like,
I agree with you on
yeah,
that.
they're good. Well, like The Office and Friends, those are big sitcoms that could easily be characterized as overrated, but like, I totally get the appeal with those two shows. But Seinfeld, I'm just like, everybody's so mean and shallow, and it's just not my cup of tea, and I don't find it funny.
There's a timelessness to good sitcoms that you can sit down and watch them whenever, and they still land well. And I mean, I grew up on Seinfeld and appreciating it, and I've still got some pretty fond memories, but I don't know that it's going to have that timelessness to it that
Yeah.
some of the best ones do.
Like I remember, although, and you can make the argument in the last 4 years, this hasn't aged super well, but the Cosby Show, when I was a kid, like I could watch that. That was not my time,
Yeah.
but I watched hours of the Cosby Show with Nick at Night. Like
Yeah.
that has a timeless feel to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just don't think Seinfeld does.
Yeah.
Well, as we transition, Pastor Daniel's going to read Philippians 4. It's a bookmark down there for you in the little ribbon. 4:10 through 13. He's going to finish that off. But as he gets ready to do that, I think it'd be good to ask them as well.
Oh yeah.
Like, what is overrated, or what do you think? You say the question.
What is something that most people
There you
around
go.
you seem to love that you find overrated?
Yeah.
And then also, too, we want to do Ask the Pastor segment. So if there's any questions that you have that we would answer, we can't guarantee we'll get to all of them, but we want to make it available and open for you to ask any question, and we could answer it biblically, pastorally. And so if you have any questions to ask a pastor, you can drop them in the comment thread or send a direct message or even email the
us
church.
at pastor@springfieldfaithcenter.org.
Yep.
Yeah.
pastor@springfieldfaithcenter.org.
And one more thing. If you know of people in our community who are not aware of this show, please let them know about it. Give them a heads up to this is happening.
Cool.
All right. So Philippians chapter 4, 10 through 13.
Yes, sir.
All right. It says this: I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, because once again you renewed your care for me. You were, in fact, concerned about me, but lacked the opportunity to show it. I don't say this out of need, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. I know both how to make do with little, and I know how to make do with a lot. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or in need. I am able to do all things through him who strengthens me.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys. Have a good week.